As a child, I've always been interested in art. Whether it was drawing, painting, or sculpting, I was using art as a way to express myself, like many do. What originally got me into art was cartoons, but most importantly, the animation that created them. Animation is a medium that artists use to make inanimate objects appear to move, and today I will explain what animation is, its history, and some of the different styles. I will also dive into some of the most famous animation studios and the tools you would need to get started if you ever wanted to start animating yourself. First things first, what is animation? The term animation refers to the process of designing and drawing sequences of images, which, through their rapid succession, create the illusion of movement to the viewer. There are 5 types of animation techniques that animators use: 3D computer animation, traditional animation, 2D vector-based animation, stop motion, and motion graphics. And regardless of which technique an animator uses, a successful animation follows 12 principles. The 12 principles of animations are squash and stretch, timing and motion, anticipation, staging, follow-throughs and overlapping actions, straight-aheads and pose-to-pose action, slow in and out, arcs, exaggeration, secondary action, solid drawing, and appeal. The squash and stretch principle is squashing and stretching an object or character to give the illusion of weight. The timing and motion principle requires fewer drawings, making an action faster and snappier, while more drawings make an action slower and smoother. The anticipation principle is the preparation for an action, and the staging principle is a presentation of a scene in a way that makes it clear to the audience. The follow-through and overlapping action principle shows loose parts of the body continuing to move after the character stops and eventually catches up. Straight ahead is drawing a scene by starting out at the beginning and going to the end. Pose to pose draws out major actions, then fills in the rest. The slow in and out principle shows more drawings at the beginning and ending of a sequence to show acceleration and deceleration. The arcs principle shows that action should follow an arc to give them a better flow, and the exaggeration principles explain that making actions more extreme can increase excitement. The secondary action principle is a second action in the scene to complement the main action. The solid drawing principle is understanding the basic 3-dimensional form when creating objects or characters. And finally, the appeal principle gives a character personality to make them feel real and interesting. The 12 Principles of Animation was introduced in 1981 by Disney animators Ollie Johnston and Frank Thompson. Now, these principles have become widely recognized as the staple for all artists working on animated videos. Now, let's go way back. The title of first ever animation is still up for debate. The act of creating the illusion of movements through still images, you could argue that craft began hundreds of thousands of years ago. The techniques of animation that we're familiar with first appeared in 1650, known as the magic lantern, which was invented by Giovanni Fontana. A simple lantern with a strip of animation sliding past a crude lens, illuminated by a single candle, was humankind's first introduction to projection. It was primarily used to scare people, with images of devilish creatures running on the wall, and generally playing on people's superstitions. Some question whether or not he truly is the inventor of this technique, due to missing animation records throughout history. In 1833, the phenakistic scope was invented by Joseph Plateau in Brussels. The device was operated by spinning the cardboard disc and viewing the reflection of the image in a mirror through a series of moving slits. In 1872, Edward Muybridge took a sequence of photographs of a horse to see if all the legs lifted up off the ground. This was the first insight into how we move. Winsor McCay was widely known as the father of animation. He converted his cartoon strip Little Nemo into a 10-minute feature film that was released on April 8, 1911. From a young age, McCay was quick, prolific, and technically skillful as an artist. He started his professional career making posters and performing for dime museums, and in 1898 began illustrating newspapers and magazines. His comic strip work has influenced generations of cartoonists and illustrators. His animation would later be one of the biggest inspirations to creating the first animated studio. Now that we've gone over a bit of the history of animation, let's look at some of the styles. 2D animation. The first type of 2D animation might be called traditional animation or cell animation. This is the classic type of animation that most are probably familiar with. In the old days, animators drew characters frame by frame, and then those drawings were transferred onto clear acetate sheets called cells for painting. That's where the term cell animation comes from. Hand-drawn animation could be done entirely analog or entirely digitally, and sometimes a mix of the two. 3D animation. 3D, also referred to as CGI or computer-generated imagery, is the most popular type of animation for feature films and become common in TV and short films as well. This animation style is highly trendy in the motion picture industry thanks to the ability to animate 3D characters faster and more realistically. Instead of hand drawings, digital three-dimensional animation requires computer-generated models. These models will be placed into the computer environment and animated using X, Y, and Z axis. Claymation. Claymation is one of the most popular forms of stop-motion animation. Stop-motion has several variants, but they all involve manipulating real-world objects. Clay and other pieces of material are molded to establish characters in a way imagination allows. Similarly to stop-motion, claymation uses frame-by-frame techniques to create an impression of continuous motion. Rotoscoping animation. Rotoscoping is an animation technique through which animators trace over footage within a software program using a rotoscoping tool. This technique goes back to the early days of cinema, when animators used to project photograph live-action movie images onto a glass panel and trace over the image. Flipbook animation. Flipbook animation represents the most primitive form of animation. The flipbook is a book or album with a series of pictures that progressively change from one page to another. When the pages are turned very quickly, different pictures simulate the animation. Typography animation. Animated typography refers to any kind of moving text, whether that text moves slowly, expands, shrinks, or morphs into something else. Text animations are used to emphasize the meaning of text and to convey an emotional-filled message. This type of animation is especially popular in cinematography and is used during the title parts of a movie. Now that we've gone over some animation styles, let's look at animation studios. An animation studio is a company that produces animated media. Whether it's hand-drawn masterpieces or a modern CGI film, the art of animation has been charming us with captivating characters, stories, and worlds for nearly a century. Raoul Barre was an important pioneer of animation studios and their evolutions over time. Although Winsor McCay was the father of animation, the idea of a studio dedicating to animating cartoons was created by Raoul Barre and his studio, Barre Studio. Although Raoul Barre created the first animated studio, the most popular animation studio of today is Walt Disney Animation Studios. The Walt Disney Animation Studios is an American animation studio that created animated features and short films. It was founded on October 16, 1923, by brothers Walt and Roy Disney. Originally, the studio was called Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio in 1923, but was renamed to Walt Disney Studio in 1926. It is one of the oldest running animation studios, and it's not hard to see why the word animation begins and ends with Disney to many people. Studio Ghibli is one of the top Japanese film animation studios in the entire country, if not the world. Out of the 15 top grossing anime films made in Japan, 8 of them were made by Studio Ghibli. When they were founded in 1985, Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata were already seasoned veterans in the Japanese animation industry. They built the studio up on the success of their first film, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, in 1984. Leica is an American stop-motion animation studio specializing in feature films, commercial contents for all media, music videos, and short films. The studio is best known for its stop-motion feature films, such as Coraline, Paranorman, The Box Trolls, Kubo and the Two Strings, and The Missing Link. The final studio we'll discuss is Pixar. Pixar is an American studio that began in 1979 as part of the Lucasfilm Computer Division, known as the Graphic Group, before it broke off as its own corporation on February 3, 1986, with the funding from Apple co-founder Steve Jobs. Pixar was later purchased by the Walt Disney Company in 2006 for more than $7 billion. Now that we know what animation is, the history behind it, the styles, and the studios that create them, let's talk about the tools that you would need to get started in creating an animation. Animators use animation software and computers to create 2D and 3D animation for websites, film, video, gaming, and mobile media. Drawing and sculpting skills still play a role in today's animation, but cutting-edge technology has combined with art to expand the field. Here are some software and technology you can use to get started. Some top software that you can use to begin animating are Blender, TV Paint, Harmony, or the most popular, Adobe Animation. Technology that makes it easier to animate are animation tablets, a stylus, and drawing gloves. Now that you have the tools you need to animate, your next step is to focus on a story. The best way to organize your story is to write a script. Once you have your story, practice sketching and developing a character and style. Once you have your story and your character, the next thing to do is to create a storyboard. Storyboards organize your shots and make it easier to visually see how to move forward with your story. Once you have your script, your story, your character, and an organized storyboard, it is now time to animate. Keep in mind that animation takes time. You can spend hours on just a 5-second clip of an animation. It can become frustrating to put in hours of work into something just to get little results. But make sure to stay patient, because once you're done with your work, you'll have amazing animation.